the detention centers that the government claimed to thousands to lose their homes. That Modi was in contact with the police office, there were no reported cow-related killings. Cow-related crimes has not only increased, but specifically targets Muslims. This is also one way to create an even bigger rift between the Muslims and the Hindus, one that will not be easy to heal. The government praises Hindus who protect cows from Muslim cow smugglers. Unfortunately, many of these families, rather than being allowed to mourn, must worry about making enough money to sustain themselves. These attacks have been going on as early as 30 years ago, when more than 100 Muslims were viciously attacked and killed in eastern Bihar. When the bodies were found, officials claimed they were actually Hindus that were mercilessly slaughtered by a Muslim mob. However, the bodies were later confirmed to be the Muslim victims of mob violence. Over the course of a month, 250 villages would be burned down and looted, the death toll going as high as 1,000, 900 of whom were Muslims. The anti-Muslim slogans that were chanted then have now been widely spread again under Modi's rule. These vicious assaults and murders all stem from a hate for Muslims, although many find different ways of phrasing it. Because not enough people know about the violence against Muslims across the world, we must spread the word and help in whatever way we can. Not only in India, but also in Palestine, Syria, and Afghanistan. Why is it that whenever it's a Muslim being tortured or terrorized, suddenly everyone turns a blind eye? So.
Thank you, Masuma. I think the main thing to take from this is, why is the media portraying it in a negative light? Why is it that we only hear half the story? And sometimes I think the question we have to ask is the news persuading people for that region, or is it trying to advance the interests of those in power? Is it trying to promote cultural and religious divisions? Is it even trying to worsen or vilify a group against another group? These are not all news is reliable and unbiased, and that is where we all need to be very careful when we are actually pursuing and reading the news. I'd like to welcome Brother Amin Shahada to speak about efforts of the BJP party to criminalize Muslim practices. Can we get a loud salawat, please? Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Okay. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ahli bayti tayyibin at-tahirin. So today I would like to, thank you. I'd like to give a few remarks regarding the persecution of Muslims and minorities in India. These minorities include Christians, Sikhs, and those on the lower caste. So I'd like to start off with a brief history. As many of you are aware, well, firstly, I don't claim to be an expert in this field. Perhaps many of you have lived experiences with these things, so you'd be able to provide better insight regarding the different dynamics at play here and the different facts. But the RSS are a group that were founded before World War II. They found inspiration in a lot of the fascist and Nazi parties, specifically the brown shirts with Mussolini in Italy and Nazi Germany. Just to give a brief overview of the RSS, a member of the RSS was implicated in the assassination of Gandhi. This kind of demonstrated their opposition to intercommunal unity. So Gandhi was striving to unite the Muslims and Hindus in India, and the RSS were kind of staunchly against this. They were banned 4 times. The RSS party was banned 4 times in India during British colonial rule. After Gandhi's assassination, when martial law, or when India was in an emergency state between 1975 and 77, and in the aftermath of the destruction of the Babri Mosque. This was a mosque that was present ever since the Mughal Empire existed, but some extremist Hindus claimed that it was built on the site of the birthplace of one of their deities. So a little bit about the violence against Muslims. The RSS, one of their central tenets, one of their core ideas is that Hindu nationalism. So they want to reduce Indianness or the Indian identity to being exclusively Hindu. The vision of the RSS and kind of their mission is to promote a society where the Hindus comprise the upper caste, and then the Dalits and other minorities form the lower castes. They're really an organization that is hell-bent on violence. They have a lot of social programs in India, but they also advocate and promote dangerous ideas, which led to a lot of communal violence and pogroms. I've listed here a couple of examples. 2002, the Gujarat riots, which killed thousands of people. Many victims are still seeking justice for the unspeakable and despicable violence that occurred there. 2013, 2020. And then I just wanted to mention Modi, the current president, was banned from coming to the US previously. He wasn't granted a visa since he served as the chief minister during the Gujarat riots. And so it was claimed that he kind of oversaw the state institutions that committed that violence. But since he was promoted to presidency, now the US has allowed him into the United States. So this demonstrates just to advance the national interests, the US is willing to kind of overstep human rights and place it on the back burner. There's a judiciary system bias against Muslims. So there's, in a number of provinces in India, they outlawed conversions through marriage. So they believed, this is a conspiracy theory, but they believed that Muslims attempted to target some Muslims married Hindus to thereby, or to thereafter, convert them to Islam. And then recently we saw some house demolitions, specifically in Uttar Pradesh, where a number of advocates who advocated against specific BJP rulings, their house were demolished. So this is known as demolition justice. And then the ban against hijab in instructional settings, including schools and colleges. But we've seen a lot of sisters in India kind of resist this unjust ruling. And they've displayed boldness and audacity in kind of not complying with this ordinance. Finally, I would like to end, please, with just some resources I'd highly recommend that I've used to learn more about the situation. There is the Indian American Muslim Council. They release monthly reports on the state of religious minorities in India. A very comprehensive report where they document all the incidents that occurred. And they constantly lobby the US government against Modi, and even allowing Modi to step onto US territory. And then also a not-for-profit called the Islamic Leadership Institute of America. They have a research team, and they've compiled a booklet, a pamphlet called Hindutva in America, So Hindutva is that ideology that we talked about, the Hindu nationalism. They talk about how actually Hindutva has spent a lot of money to proliferate in the United States, to establish a lot of sister satellite organizations here in the United States, where they advocate for BJP policies. So here's a link to the pamphlets, and I'd encourage everyone to please kindly take a look at those. Thank you very much. And wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa alihi tahirin.
Thank you, Amin. That was very informational and helpful. In summary, I think India is probably one of the largest democracies that we have, but yet it doesn't act in a secular way. Ever since the National Party, ever since the BJP party took power from the national government, from the National Party, it has been leading towards more the RSS vision and more towards Hinduvada, more of a Hindu nationalist policy. And that leads us to our next speaker. It's better. This leads us to our next speaker, Dr. Aslam Abdullah. He has a doctorate in communications. He is the author of many, many books, the editor-in-chief of Muslim Media Network that publishes Muslim Observer. He's also the chairman of a Muslim Public Affairs Council and vice president of the American Muslim Council. In his current role, he continues to serve and represent Muslims in several interfaith conferences. He will be joining us virtually from California. Please welcome him with a loud salawat.
Assalamu alaikum. Sorry, it was my mistake. Once again, I start. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Ahmaduhu wa usalli ala rasulihil kareem. Khatam al-anbiya wal mursaleen. Inna Allah wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala ya ayyuhalladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. اللهم صل على سيدنا وعلى آله وأصحابه وآل بيته. I'm grateful to Shahe Najaf Islamic Center for creating this opportunity and inviting me to speak on this topic that is going to dominate the world for the next few decades. Many young people who are present in the audience would definitely feel the shock and feel the essence of this particular issue in the years that is yet to come. One of the verses that were recited by the young Qari at the beginning reads, "In Allah la yuhibbu zalimin." Allah does not like those who commit oppression, those who are oppressors. And in reality, this is the essence of human existence. This is the essence of the divine message. This is the purpose of human life that should be accepted, that is built on oppression and that supports the oppressors. And in the next few weeks, we're going to relive and remind ourselves the story of the greatest sacrifice that one can even offer in the struggle against oppression and injustice, when none other than the grandson of the Prophet ﷺ challenged the might of the time, even though they came to Muslims, even though they claimed that they were the whole Quran, yet he challenged them on the basis of their commitment to justice and then offered everything that he had. Shine example for us that no matter where we are, what religion we come from, what faith we belong to, we must never let oppression go unchallenged. Even if it is done by those who claim to be Muslims, even if it is done by those who claim to recite the Quran, even if it is done by those who are claiming their ownership of a faith that is a faith of those who are pure, it's a faith of those who believe in the divine guidance, who believe in the divine teaching. Now, all the three speakers, the young speakers who spoke, probably gave you an idea of what basically is happening in India. And certainly I'm not going to spend much time in discussing how many houses have been demolished, how many Muslims have been lynched, how many people have been destroyed, because these are statistics. For those who believe in justice, for those who stand against oppression, even a single human life is important regardless of what tag you put on that life. So I'm not going to spend time on that. I'm going to focus on why it's happening in India. Why is it happening in India that after a rule of and the Muslims in that country for almost 1100 years, all of a sudden the tides are turned against the Muslims. Islam has become a pariah in that land. After all, those people who are making Islam a pariah, Islam an annexed religion, were the ones whose forefathers lived with Muslims for centuries. Why is this happening? That we have to understand some of the things that basically are taking place in it and are being unnoticed by many of us. Around 1920s, movement emerged in India under the influence of the Nazi party of Hitler and the fascist party of Mussolini. And that movement called itself Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, Precisely, it was 1925 that the organization was giving it form, but in the 1920s. And the idea was that the India primarily belonged to Hindus. And when they talked about Hindus, they say upper castes. And who are the upper castes? The castes that, according to their scriptures, were born out of the head and chest and abdomen of God. They make up approximately 17% of India's population. But they are the one who basically control more than 3 million temples. And through those temples and places of worship, they control the minds and heart of the people. They are called Brahmins, they are called Kshatris, they are called Vaishyas. Now, that movement established and claimed that India does not have a place for its minorities. If they want to live in India, they have to subjugate themselves to the Hindu ideals. And when they talk about Hindu ideals, they talk about Hindu upper castes. Now, interestingly, the idea was that Hitler's and the Mussolini's movement was primarily an Aryan movement, the Aryan race. And the upper castes who settled in India some 4,000 years ago claimed that they were also part of the Aryans. They tried to make this kind of link. What is interesting that around that time, in the 1930s, a French woman whose name was Maximiani Julia Portas. Idea. She was a member of the Nazi Party. She converted to Hinduism and called herself Savitri Devi Mukherjee. She spent 15 years in India from 1938 until the independence of the country. She died in 1982 in the United States. She was a white supremacist, she was a Nazi person, and she came up with a book which is called A Warning to Hindus. And in that book, she made 3 major observations. One observation was that in the world, if there exists any pure Aryan race, it is the upper caste Brahmins, because through their caste superiority and supremacy and purity, they have maintained their original bloodline. So they are the purest of the pure. That's the first thing. Because they are the purest of the pure, and because the Aryans are a superior race, they have to be considered supremacist, to be considered supreme, to be considered holy, to be considered the closer to the divine. And hence, they, together with the white supremacist and redneck people, make up the purest of the race. So that's one thing. And the white race should adopt them and should accept them as of their racial community. So that was the first thing. The second point was that the greatest challenge that this Aryan race faces in India, not only in India but elsewhere in the world, comes from Islam. Because of its egalitarian concepts, because of its belief that all humans are equal, because of its belief that God does not discriminate people on the basis of their birth or on the basis of their caste or on the basis of their status. And hence, Muslims have to be confronted. Now, she also then came up with the conclusion that the confrontation of Muslims would be done in 2 ways. One is to control their population, to make than 15%, 15% anywhere they are. Because the moment they cross, that was her thesis, 30% of the population, they become a nuisance to the people of that particular country. And the second observation was that in order to control Muslims and contain Muslims, violence has to be perpetrated in an organized and a systematic manner. Now, this is not what I am concluding. This is what she wrote in that, which is called A Warning to Hindus of India. You can look at that particular book on the internet. It is available. I have written extensive of that book also, and I've summarized that book in many of my books. So, in a sense, her thesis was that if the Hindu have to succeed in India, they have to confront Muslims through population control, through dehumanizing them, and through making sure that they become subject to violence and they become subject to all kind of rights and the kind of humiliation that they deserve, as she said. Now, she was a disciple of Savarkar, who was the founder of RSS. And in fact, Savarkar's brother wrote a preface to her book. That book has been translated in almost every language of India and has been distributed in almost all over the country. Now, this RSS, since 1925, has established more than 1 million branches in more than 700 districts and more than 98 million villages of India. Each branch has a maximum of 60 people. You can imagine 60 million. And day in and day out, they are being taught the same message. Muslims are the enemies. That the Muslims' rule in India was a brutal rule. That the Muslims' presence in India was against the upper castes. That the Muslims tried to dehumanize Jews when they were in power. And that the Muslims basically forcibly converted many people to Islam. That's what their thesis is. And then the conclusion is that establishing a Hindu Rashtra, a Hindu state, a Hindu political entity, we would not be able to live at peace with ourselves, and we would not be able to live the faith properly. In that situation, we have to confront Muslims, and we have to decimate them, and we have to render them insignificant in the country itself. So for 100 years, they have prepared the minds of people. This hatred that you see today is not the outcome of one day, one event. What happened after the independence, they changed their strategy. Rather than talking about it loudly, they infiltrated in the military, they infiltrated in the schools, they infiltrated in the intelligence agencies, they infiltrated in police. They basically controlled the intellectual centers of India until the time came when they realized that now their entry into politics would pave the way for their utmost control. It is in their writings that by 2025 they want to establish Hindu Rashtra in such a situation, in such a manner that the people who belong to minorities are decimated. Now, when they talk about minorities, they specifically identify two major minorities. Islam is one, and Christianity, because they believe that they are non-Indian faiths, even though Buddhism is also a minority religion, Jainism is also a minority religion, Sikhism is also a minority religion. Tribals that make approximately 9% of India's population are also a minority they don't believe in Hinduism. And the Dalits, the lower castes, who, according to the scriptures, are untouchables, also do not identify with the Hindu gods and goddesses. They have their own gods. Yet, to the upper caste, the minorities that they fear are Islam, Muslim or Christians. So that's what they focus on. Sikhs make approximately 2%, and the Jains make 0.8%, and Buddhists make approximately 1.4%. All those people, yet and they are not considered. Even though the upper castes, prior to the introduction of Islam and Christianity in India, persecuted Buddhists and Jains, and they converted hundreds and thousands of their places of worship into Hindu temples. Many of the Buddhists have been talking about it. So the issue is basically the issue of racial superiority, which is cloaked in the garb of that Aryans are the most superior nation in the world, and then Aryans deserve the right to rule over the world, to be the leaders of the universe, and together with white supremacists, they basically make the perfect match to control the sources of them. That is precisely what the rights are. Now, what we find is that from 1919, the same time when the organization was being established in India, 1924, there has been the presence of RSS, or the Hindu nationalists, or Hindu supremacists, and when I say Hindus, I mean the upper caste Hindus, have been present in the States. And through the efforts of Maximiliane Julia Portas, that French lady was called the Princess of Hitler, and who settled down in India, she put these Hindu nationalists in touch with the white supremacists and opened doors for these nationalists to develop stronger ties with white supremacist groups, or the Nazi groups, or what we call the groups like Patriots, or the groups like Proud Boys, all those kind of things. And that's why, in 2019, when Modi visited the United States, the meeting with what you called Trump was arranged in Houston, and many of the people who attended also belong to this white supremacist. And if you look at the profile of those people who attended that, not a good number of the white supremacist leadership was present in that particular conference. So, and that's why you would hear the Prime Minister of India, speaking on the stage, called "Ab ki baar Modi Sarkar," this time Trump would come back again. So that is the relationship that we need to understand. The issue is not just the issue of Muslims in India. The issue of the axis of evil which is being built around, which is being built against oppression, which is being built around the issue of racial superiority. In that particular situation, India, because of its edge on technology, because of its purchasing power, India contributes nearly, the Indian IT companies contribute nearly $190 billion to the US economy every year. Almost all the mega IT Chinese leadership is in the hands of India. So the reality is very clear that they are using that leverage to basically make sure that no one questions what is happening in India, and no one raises the issue of the human rights violation or the opponents. Even though, the liberals, which make approximately 48% of the United States population, seem to be speaking against the human rights violation against all the world, yet they feel reluctant to talk about the real violations that are taking place, not only in the Gulf, but also in India. And it is their influence in the Gulf that has basically opened channels the BJP to make inroads there. So that is the reality. A Hindu Rashtra with its idea of racial superiority is a threat to the world, not just Muslims. It is a threat to all sects of Muslims, not just the dominant. It is a threat to the Gulf countries once it gains power and control over things. Threat to the Middle East as well as to Iran and Uzbekistan and Azerbaijan, because the intentions are very clear. It is not an issue of economic superiority. It's an ideology that is built in this. Now, if anyone wants to have more understanding of what is happening, and I would conclude it with this, and we'll take questions if there are any, that even though they swear by the Constitution of India, which calls itself secular and pluralistic and socialist, they still want to replace that Constitution with the laws which they call the laws of Manu. Now, Manu's laws, the Manus are specified in a book which is in Sanskrit, which is called Manu Samarthi, which means Manu's laws. These are laws that, according to their tradition, were built thousands of wise men called Manu, and basically define how one should live in this world. And in that one clearly begins with that idea God created 4 types of people. Those who came from their head, they were the Brahmins. Those who came from their chest, they were the Kshatriyas. Those who came from abdomen were the Vaishyas. And those who came from his feet were the Shudras. And these are the birth-assigned castes that no one can change them. And those who were born accidentally, they are called Malech or untouchables. And for almost 5,000 years, nearly 80% of India's population has been in that category of Shudra, means the lower castes, the so-called lower castes, and the Malech. One of the anger that the upper castes have towards Islam, towards Christianity, is that it appealed to the lower castes and gained thousands and thousands of converts from the lower caste communities. The conversion in India did not take place through force. There has never been an incident in an organized manner where appeals and the campaigns were launched by Muslim Sufis or Muslim preachers or Muslim rulers to convert people to Islam. In fact, many of the Muslim rulers did not even allow the conversion to take place because that would mean that income that is coming from jizya would come down. So forget about those kind of rulers and those things. It is in this particular context that enmity, animosity against Islam and Muslims have taken place. So the issue is serious. And this issue has to be taken at an emergency level in the United States as well. All what we need to do is that whatever forums we have, we should expose these ideas to those people and tell them that it is not a Muslim or Islamic issue. Islamic issue in the sense that it basically inspires us to speak against injustice. And we would be speaking against injustice even if they were non-Muslims who were victims of injustice. So for us, the issue is not our religious or ethnic identity. For us, the issue is the Quran says, "In Allah la yuhibbu as-salimin." What our Prophet taught us, what the grandson of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us, and then sacrificed his life. That even if you have, the life is important, but the goals of life becomes more important when the injustice is committed. And injustice is being committed on the basis of racism, on the basis of casteism, on the basis of one's appearance, on the basis of one's things. Let us see wherever we are. We are not the ultimate controller of our actions. The one who is up there in the heavens, God Almighty, is the one who basically is in control of everything. All that we have to do is to follow the path that He has asked us to follow, and to live the life in the shadow of the Prophet and his family, as much as we can. Use every opportunity in your schools, in universities, in your college, in your interfaith councils, in your community, to tell them of what is happening and what our responsibility is at this particular moment. Because the smaller efforts will create bigger impact in the long run. I am hopeful, even though I have mentioned all those kind of things. I'm not pessimistic. I think the example of Quran will always inspire us, no matter where we are. And if you all are aware of the Urdu language, let me conclude it with the 3 stanzas Urdu that basically describes the essence of the purpose of life. रुख गर्दिशे जहां का बदलना है जिंदगी, सांचे में इनकलाब के ढलना है जिंदगी. रुख गर्दिशे जहां का बदलना है जिंदगी, सांचे में इनकलाब के ढलना है जिंदगी. अज़्मो अमल की धूप में जलना है जिंदगी, कुर्बानियों की पे चलना है जिंदगी. अपने लहू से आज संवरने का वक्त है, एक और करबला से गुजरने का वक्त है. Thank you very much, and I am open to questions now.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. I'm going to open the floor up for any questions now. If anybody has any questions, just raise your hand. I'll bring the mic over to you. Okay, I guess we'll move on then. Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. That was very informational and insightful about the RSS and how it's infiltrated not only our schools, military, and institutions. It is not only in India, but also sweeping all across US. I think we do have one question. 1 second, I'm going to walk over to you.
The infiltration of the RSS sounds very similar to how white supremacy has infiltrated all systems and levels of society in this country. What kind of commonalities do you see, and how could we approach kind of addressing these problems together?
Very good question, very important questions. In a sense, what you're saying, that how should we confront oppression? How should we confront wrong? I think one of the important thing to realize that what is happening is wrong. We realize what is happening is wrong, that we develop alliances with those who are like-minded. They don't have to be part of our faith. They don't have to agree with everything that we believe in. They don't have to believe in our ideals. What is important on the minimum agenda of fighting against injustice and challenging these kind of things, we should develop alliance. In the United States, politics is local. Begin with your city hall, your ward, and develop those kind of ties, because it is here that the politics germinate. You know, as we see that the difference between the other countries and the United States is that here politics does not come from top down, but from go down to top, that you develop alliances. And we have that kind of inspiration, and we have that kind of motivation to basically create alliances with people in our neighborhood and to involve and include them in our struggle against injustice. But we have to understand that we have to use the idiom and the language which they understand. We are new immigrants in this country. We have not understood this country very well. Even our younger generation, even though it has been brought up here, it still lacks that kind of historical understanding of this country, of what basically happened to the African Americans here, what happened to Indians, and what happened to many other poor white communities who were subject to violence, who were subject to racism and all those kinds of things. What happened to Hispanics? So we have to understand this country. We have to understand the people of this country. We have to identify with their problems. And once we identify, and once we work with them, certainly we will take Levite supremacists and these Hindu supremacists head on. There's nothing, that can prevent us from doing that, because it's not just a question of our survival. It's a question of the survival of many others who believe in the decency, who believe in equality.
Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. All right, for the sake of time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on. Thank you, Dr. Abdullah. And I'm going to introduce our next speaker. I'd like to introduce our alim for Imam al-Asr Masjid, Hujjat al-Islam, Sayyid Sulaiman Hassan. Please welcome him with a loud salawat.
Rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We had some very enlightening presentations from younger members of our community and from Dr. Abdullah, shedding light on the state of human rights, human dignity, and the situation facing the Muslims in India. And in my concluding remarks, I would like to relate this issue that we talked about during this event with our responsibilities as Muslims. The first question that we might ask is, why does the issue of Muslim suffering or persecution in India relate to us? And this is something that is related to our mission as a Muslim community. The Quran describes the identity of Muslims in Surah Al Imran, verse 110. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس. This ummah, this community was meant to be a gift for humanity. Now, this is an aspiration, it is a responsibility. It's not something we can pat our shoulders on and say that we have fulfilled. We were meant to be the best ummah brought forth for humanity because, unlike other communities, nations, tribes, religions, we were not meant to look after our own interests, our national interests, our tribal interests, our personal interests, but rather we were meant to look for the greater interests of humanity. The vision that God had given us when He sent us to this earth, and to advocate for the needs, the rights of all of humanity. تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله. The Quran says that the identity of the Muslims and the vision of the Muslims is not to conquer territory or to rule over others or to convert others, but rather تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر. You advocate for what is right and what is known to be good, and you speak against that which is evil and that which is known to be evil. And the reason you do it is تؤمنون بالله, because you believe in God, you bring a spiritual element, and you bring that value of service and sacrifice for the sake of justice to your public life. And so you have an economic presence, you have a social presence, you have a political presence, but your social and your economic and your political presence is in service of a spiritual goal. That was meant to be the vision that animates us as Muslims. And so we were never meant to say that that's a problem that belongs to other people in a different country, or a different part of the world, or a different class of people, or a different tribe, even within our own society. But rather any issue that pertains to justice, any issue that pertains to persecution, regardless of whether the person suffering is Muslim or non-Muslim, is an issue of concern to us, and it is an Islamic issue, because we tu'minuna billah, we believe in God, and we wish to advocate for the vision of humanity that was revealed to us by God, which is rooted in justice and in sacrifice. So in India, we have the third largest population of Muslims in the world. About 200 million Muslims, although the exact number is a matter of dispute, because sometimes there are questions as to the accuracy of the census and whether Muslims are being undercounted. But according to official estimates, in 2019, we had 200 million Muslims in India. That is the third largest population of Muslims in the world, after Indonesia and Pakistan. And it is the largest minority of Muslims in the world. But it is not just Muslims that are persecuted and suffering in India. The vast majority of the population of India belongs to people who identify with the lower castes. And we heard a little bit about the caste system and caste discrimination in India. In some parts of India, people will tell you there is no caste system. Just like people will tell you that in America today, racism is just a thing of the past. But in many ways, the caste system is as vicious and maybe even more insidious than apartheid was at its worst, because it is a denial of the humanity and the history of the vast majority of the population. And if we look at estimates, if 70% of India's population identifies as members of the lower castes, that's 1 billion people. So this is perhaps one of the most important issues of human dignity in the entire world in our time. 200 million Muslims who are being denied their humanity by a fascist political ideology, and 1 billion people who are at risk for their civil, their political, their social, and their economic rights being taken from them through that same ideology. It is a very important issue in our world today, and it is all the more tragic because it is virtually unheard of. There was a time when the current Prime Minister of India was banned from even entering the United States. But then when he was elected Prime Minister, President Obama removed that ban. And one of the things that I would like to speak about is the way in which the subjugation of Muslims in India is related to our politics and our society. According to statistics that have been compiled by some groups who have researched the project of Hindu nationalism, there were over $160 million that were raised and spent by 7 Hindu fascist or Hindu nationalist groups just in the 18 years between 2001 and 2019. $160 million. Much of it was money raised in the United States that went to India to support candidates and policies subjugating members of the lower castes and marginalizing Muslims. And a large portion of that was money that was funneled through tax-exempt organizations, which means all of us are subsidizing through tax-exempt organizations and contributions. We and our taxes are subsidizing those donations that are used to oppress our fellow human beings and our fellow Muslims. There is a direct connection. And the second major connection is that much of the hatred is spread through WhatsApp and Facebook groups. There are thousands of WhatsApp groups, small and large, that are dedicated to creating, fabricating crimes and attributing them to Muslims, to rile up a society that has lived largely harmoniously for generations and turn them against one another. So these are areas where we bear a direct responsibility. Not just in the sense that it is a human issue and every issue of human rights belongs to us, but because it is our corporations, our tax money, our elected officials that are supporting the infrastructure of oppression and marginalization. All of us, Muslims and non-Muslims in the United States, we have a responsibility to rise up, educate ourselves and each other, and develop alliances with other groups that are fighting fascism and that work for human dignity to ensure at the first level that our resources, our taxes, our elected officials, our corporations are not helping and facilitating the infrastructure of hate. That's not about something that we need to do for people over there in India, but it is something that we need to do right here in our own country. And when we look at that, we will see that the work that needs to be done is not only to prevent oppression of Muslims or prevent the subjugation of human beings in another part of the world, but it is the same crony capitalism, the same right-wing groups, the same neo-fascist groups that do want to subjugate people here, which are also allied with those who are subjugating people in India or in other parts of the world. So in a very real sense, it is a single movement to advocate for human dignity, which we need to be a part of. The situation of Muslims in India is often looked at from a Muslim lens. And Muslims have many grievances, especially with the large number of riots, destruction of houses of worship, bans on diet, dress, public prayer, many other forms of Muslim identity and worship. But to effectively give a positive and not just a reactive vision for society, what we as Muslims need to do is develop an Islamic framework to advocate for our conception of a just society. The verse of Surah Al-Imran that I recited, and this phrase is repeated in the Quran, تَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَتَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. You advocate for ma'ruf and you advocate against munkar. And then the Quran doesn't say that you call people towards God, it says you believe in God. Because you believe in God, you want to establish what is good, what is fair, what is just, what is beautiful in society. But the Quran doesn't say تَأْمُرُونَ بِالْحَقِّ, because one of the words for truth in Arabic is haqq. And the Quran doesn't say وَتَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْبَاطِلِ, you advocate against what is evil. The Quran uses the term ma'ruf and munkar. And ma'ruf is related to haqq. The good is related to what is true. Munkar is related to batil. What is evil is related to munkar, what is bad. But the difference is the term the Quran uses implies that there is a knowledge of what is good. Ma'ruf literally means that which is known. And munkar literally means that which is unknown. And so the Quran is telling us that as Muslims, we should look to speak to the common conscience of people, the shared values that unite people across different belief systems, and to advocate that if you and I all agree that human beings should be able to live in safety and in dignity and with their most basic needs to food, to shelter, to health care available to them, even if we might have differences about certain religious values and teachings, even if there might be many things within our cultures, our political beliefs, our religions that are different, at the very least, those things that we all believe in and those things that we all share, we should advocate for it. We should come together. And when it comes to the situation of Muslims and non-Muslim minorities, and I would say actually the majority of people in India, because the majority does belong to the lower castes, then it is not just the Muslim grievances, but it is those shared places where human rights, human dignity have been compromised that we should focus on. And that is something that Muslims will be able to unite on, but also many other minorities, as our previous speakers indicated, Christians, Sikhs, and even members of different groups that are known as within the Hindu society. And then there is a broader goal that we have. It isn't, first of all, to change the world. It isn't necessarily to have an effect on the politics of India or the policies even of our own government. But it is for us to become the kind of person who is oriented towards knowing what is going on in the world, caring about issues of justice and injustice, and advocating for justice, finding allies to advocate for justice. Because ultimately, we don't believe that an economic boycott of a company or a country is going to solve the problems of injustice that we see. We don't believe that a political election is going to solve the problems of injustice that we see. We believe that the nature of the problems that humanity faces is spiritual before it is anything else. And therefore, the solution also must be spiritual. When we advocate for justice, yes, we do hope to have an effect on society and on the economy and on politics. But first and foremost, we want to have an effect on our own spirituality. Because when we care, when we inform ourselves, and when we advocate for justice, we are aligning ourselves with the spiritual arc of the world that God has created. And that spiritual arc of the world, that is another way to express the mission and the vision of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam. When we speak of waiting for the appearance of the Imam of our time, the awaited Mahdi, that the followers of Ahlul Bayt and all Muslims await, and in reality all humanity awaits, we are not just speaking about advocating for God to fulfill a promise, but we are speaking of preparation and readying ourselves, because that movement is a movement for the restoration of justice. And if I am not oriented in my life, in my thinking, in my values, in my words and in my deeds towards justice, then what connection do I have to that divine promise for the establishment of justice throughout the world? So that is our primary goal. We need to be oriented towards justice. There are many events that if you send out an invitation to the Muslim world, you will have a large number of people who will come, because they think that is part of their religious identity. Some will come because it's habit. Some will come because they feel an obligation. Some will come because it is tradition. Some will come if the event has food or has some fun part in it. But the one type of event that often has the fewest people to attend is an event that talks about an issue of justice and that wants to advocate for Muslims to have a greater presence on that issue. That tells us something about the nature of our Islam and the shallowness of our understanding of our religion and the vision that our religion gives us. We are coming in just a few short weeks to the very important month of Muharram. And during that time, Muslims throughout the world, and in particular followers of Ahlul Bayt, will relive and will learn from the movement of Imam Hussein alayhi salam and the martyrs of Karbala. But as we move towards Muharram, let us commit that we don't want that remembrance just to be a commemoration. And we don't want the slogan of justice for which we honor Imam Hussein just to be a slogan. Let us be advocates and ambassadors for the causes of justice. And let us ensure that we stand up, we are counted, and we are present. Insha'Allah, through that sincerity, we will be able to also effect positive change on the many issues that confront us in this society and throughout the world. And most importantly, through our preparation, we will be worthy of praying to God for His grace and for His assistance and for the completion of our efforts and our prayers through the eradication of all evil from the face of the earth and the establishment of a truly just system in every corner of this earth. For our presenters, in particular our young presenters, and for all who contributed to this program, I pray to Allah to accept your efforts, and I pray that all of us are able to continue to learn and advocate for this very important cause and to connect it to all other causes of justice that we as Muslims need to be informed about and need to be present for throughout the world. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.